A living thing desires above all else to discharge its strength. Life itself is willed power. Nothing else matters.
Far Cry 4 holds a very special place in my heart. Sure, it was Far Cry 3 that got me into it, but Far Cry 4 made this into a serious relationship, if you will. I had played Far Cry 3 just before Far Cry 4 was announced and was immediately hyped when I saw those trailers. At the time, I was only playing on the Xbox 360, but I wanted to play on PC. As it would happen, I was 15 at the time and only had a shitty laptop that could barely run Minecraft at 12 FPS on a 2-chunk render distance. There was a snowball's chance in hell that that thing would handle Far Cry 4. So I waited, and time passed, and I replayed Far Cry 3, waiting for a chance to play this game. This didn't happen for a few years. What finally got me there was getting a job at 17 and buying my first gaming PC. It had a GTX 1070 and a 7600K. Now I was ready for some PC master race levels of FPS and graphics, oh yeah. Except for I had blown most of my budget on the PC itself, obviously, and I could only afford a $90 monitor. As it would happen, it was a 900p monitor. I also couldn't afford the game for that reason and had to wait until my next paycheck, except for my girlfriend came to my rescue and got us so I wouldn't have to wait another couple weeks. The pixel count was low, but believe me, the game blew me away. That was more pixels than the Xbox 360 was pushing. But then the game started running really slow after a few minutes after launching it. Turns out CyberPower had sent me a faulty water cooler for my CPU. Cue waiting another 3 fucking weeks for a replacement because I had to send the old cooler all the way back. Then they had to send me a new one all the way back. Then I realized the morons didn't even send me a mounting bracket in the replacement. The replacement didn't even come in like original packaging or anything. Cue me waiting another whole week for that to arrive. But then my dear audience, I was able to play Far Cry 4 in all of its glory. Welcome to the next episode of my Far Cry video essay series, where I discuss what Far Cry is, where it started, and where it'll end up. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, I asserted that Far Cry 3 set the standard for what a Far Cry game should be, given its massive popularity. I also have dubbed it the mainstream identity for Far Cry. With each game, I am comparing it to the mainstream identity to see if it's still adhering to that, plus I'm comparing it to the game before it to see how it changed from the last. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, you may find the links below. But I'll be straightforward with you. I'm writing this episode as if you've already watched at least the Far Cry 3 episode, which is the 3rd episode. I'm considering that video required watching because this game and that game share so much in common. Before we start, please consider supporting me with the usual engagement stuff, a comment and a like. Those are immensely helpful for YouTube to know I did well, and please consider subscribing if you like me a lot. With all that said though, let's talk about a game I hold very dearly to my heart, Far Cry 4. In creating this series, I've learned very quickly how to listen and learn to what a game is telling me, or I guess really any story. Most of the stories we consume are pedagogical in nature, so if you keep your ears open and listen carefully, you'll walk away with something to think about. Far Cry 4 is no different. What's unique to me about this opening is the way it tells you all you need to know about what the game's goals are. Far Cry 4, much like 3, doesn't hide its intentions much at all, maybe just a little bit more. The difference here is that it drops the curtain within the first few minutes and bears all for us to witness. We play as AJ Gale, a young man returning to Kyrat, a country in the Himalayas where he was born but never really lived. His mother has died and he is taking her ashes to a place called Lakshmana. On the way to the checkpoint, we hear what the embassy has told him.
I must legally advise you against traveling into Karat. We have no official diplomatic presence in Karat due to the civil unrest with the Golden Path.
It paints a bleak picture. AJ's travel companion slips a bit of cash into his passport. The guards will be bribed. Doesn't fill me with much confidence that this will go well. And it doesn't.
I distinctly remember saying, stop the bus. Yes, stop the bus. Not shoot the bus. I'm very particular with my words. Stop. Shoot. Stop. Shoot. Do those words sound the same?
But it got out of control.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
It got out of control.
Not out of control. I hate when things get out of control. One fucking job, but you couldn't fucking do that! And I got blood on my fucking shoes. At least there's a silver lining. You didn't completely fuck it up. Get up, boy. I'd recognize those eyes anywhere. I'm so sorry about this. This was supposed to be... well, not this. We have a party waiting for you. I am terribly embarrassed about all of this. This was supposed to be very simple, but you know, if you give food to monkeys, they just throw their shit at each other. You know? Oh, would you hold this? For just a moment, I want to get a little picture right into the camera. There we are. Awesome. Don't worry about a thing, my boy. This will soon be behind us, and we'll be off on our grand adventure. Because I have cleared my calendar for you. You and I are gonna tear shit up!
Should I stay or should I go?
Hopefully you paid attention, because everything you saw told you all you need to know to understand Far Cry 4. After the bag is taken off of AJ's head, we get to witness the nonchalant attitude of Pagan Min. He's a dictator, sure, but he's accommodating, it would seem.
You really don't remember me, do you? Your mother, she never spoke of me, never mentioned me. No, we'll change all that.
Ah yes, it seems like he has familial connections to AJ. But there's something lingering there. Some knowing look in his eyes. He recognizes us for what we are. Well, Darpan gets a call out for help and is taken away. In the meantime, AJ does as he's told.
Don't move. I will be right back.
When Min comes back, we get to ride to Lakshmana in a helicopter, which turns out to be the name of AJ's sister, and not a location. Clever, Ubisoft. We also learn a bit about AJ's father.
Did your mother ever tell you about your father?
Never know.
Mohan, the great protector of the Golden Path. He was a cunt. He hauled your mother out, sent her to spy on me. But we fell in love. We had a child. And that is when Mohan showed his true colors. He drove you and your mother away. Even killed your sister, Lakshmana. Which brings us here.
After placing Ishwari next to Lakshmana, we finally get to enjoy some father-son time.
Oh, good. You feel better now? Get it out of your system? Good. Maybe now we can finally shoot some goddamn guns.
I guess that was that. Roll credits. So, what was this game about? Did it adhere to the Far Cry 3 formula? What does it say if we listen? Well, to answer that last question, I think we might have missed something. We didn't do a whole lot of the Far Cry thing. There was no outposts or guns or collectibles. I'm almost able to put it all together in my head, but to understand what Far Cry 4 is saying, I think there is some missing piece of the puzzle. Maybe we need to rewind a bit. Hold on, right there. Yeah, that's the spot. You see it? We can leave the mansion if we go down those stairs. Wow, I nearly made a really short video on Far Cry 4. Man, I'm glad I noticed this. This would have been very embarrassing. Alright, it's rewind time. Let's get this show on the road. Let's count up all of our clues, gang, and find out what this story is all about. Pagan was expecting Ajay. Got it, it's because there's probably at least a 50% chance he's Ajay's father. Lakshmana was a sibling, not a place. Ishwari wanted the family to be back together, so Ajay had to bring the ashes to Pagan's palace where Lakshmana had been laid to rest. So now I'm thinking there's about a 100% chance, but we call it 95% chance just to not get too cocky about my detective skills. Pagan is nonchalant about this whole interaction as if he expects us to play along. Interesting. The Golden Path is labeled a terrorist group by Pagan, but we can't really trust his judgment, can we? Dude's a dictator. Where can we find this Golden Path? It's down these slightly spooky looking stairs. And what we find on the other side is a troubling sight to behold, so I guess I was right about it being spooky. Darpan is being tortured by this Deplure fella who was so graciously hosting our little most likely father-son get-together. He got some interesting backstory he exposition dumps to Darpan. Don't be too hasty though, because this character only spends a few minutes on screen and you can skip most of it if you're not careful.
Sorry. Hey babe, hey listen, I'm in a meeting right now, I can't really talk. Yeah, you know, it is stressful times over here. We've got a new client, and I am not sure he's as good as I am. No, I will call you as soon as it is done. I don't think it'll take much longer. Yeah. How are the girls? Good, 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 good. Give everyone a big kiss from me, okay? I love you. I love you too. Okay, bye. You know, I would retire here if I could. But the missus, she would never understand. Like a few years back, my company started downsizing, outsourcing all of my work to third world shitholes like this, actually. And next thing I know, I'm a desk jockey. Me. I fucking hated it. I got sent home for stress leave. And there I am, my wife at work, my kids at school, and I'm sitting on the couch every day staring at that idiot box. But that's when I saw him. Dr. Phil. Do you have him up here? Dr. Phil? Amazing. He says to me, and I remember this very clearly because it really stuck with me. If I'm going to be really happy, I have to find my inner truth. Lightning bolt. And I realized that I need to embrace the things that I am good at. Which, unfortunately for you, is this. Good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be the best me that I can possibly be. If I have to follow that work halfway across the world, that is what I am going to do. I am off the couch. I am supporting my family. I am the fucking man.
We'll talk more about Deplure later. Getting out this door, we meet a man who seems to know us. Does everyone here know us? Odd.
I'm with the Golden Path.
Golden Path?
We're friends. I knew your father. We're here to rescue you, son of Mohan.
What about Darpan?
You are our priority. We need to get you out of here safely, no matter the cost. Darpan would understand. Now stay close.
There's the predictable Far Cry affair for an opening, one that I quite love. When I first ran out these doors, saw the dust flying, sprayed lead from this pistol, and ultimately ended up in a big ass canyon, I found it far more exhilarating than Far Cry 3's opening. This opening effectively represents the difference between Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4. Kyrat is a bigger and more explosive playground than the Rook Islands. We're deep in tutorial territory now, Sarge. What of this tutorial? It's good. Excellent, really. Yes, it's a linear area, but it effectively sets up all that someone needs to know about traversing this world and engaging in epic duels with Pagan's men. Here we can see the new bait system make a return from Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon. This time it doesn't summon a blood dragon, but a black bear will have to do. There's a few new mechanics on display here. Ajay can now use throwing knives, a satisfying one-hit kill on par with the bow, except for with more armored enemies you need to do headshots. There's also the grappling hook. Pagan gives Ajay a call. This becomes a regular occurrence.
Ajay, my boy, are you busy? You don't mind me calling, do you? Fantastic. You really are an excellent listener. Look, no hard feelings about the crab rangoon. I know it's not to everyone's taste. But you'll be pleased to know I had the chef executed for his incompetence. Or was it his family we killed? Regardless, next time I can promise you a better spread. That's the last time I'm kidnapping a fucking TV celebrity chef.
Ubisoft specifically wanted to make Pagan a little bit more present in Far Cry 4, so they allowed him to call up Ajay at any time to say some wacky shit. This time he's actually apologetic, oddly enough. He's not mad at Ajay for escaping. This introduction of phone calls annoyed me in my first playthrough, only to eventually become a tolerated aspect of my experience in subsequent playthroughs. But I've come to respect the way they allowed Pagan to be a bit of a recluse while maintaining contact with Ajay, while not constantly forcing Ajay into increasingly contrived interactions with Pagan. It was a good call, even if it doesn't feel the best in the end product. It's atop this snow-blanketed summit that Kyrat strikes me with its beauty every time. How can a game look so good 9 years later? I don't know, but sometimes it looks outright bad. But it's not hard for me to walk around for a few minutes and find a view worth a screenshot. Ajay makes it to Sabal in the tower, and things predictably go wrong.
Why are you guys helping me?
You're the son of Mohan Ghale. You may not know it, but that name carries a lot of weight in Kyrat, especially for the Golden Path.
Are those army guys still looking for me?
Pagan men will stop at nothing to get you back.
We're here. Welcome to Banapur, home of the Golden Path.
Who's this? Where's Darpan?
He didn't make it. This is Ajay Ghale, Mohan's son.
Let me understand. Darpan's dead? And you brought me this?
I'm not involved in whatever this is. I'm just looking for Lakshmana.
We're in the middle of a fucking war. We don't have time for tourists.
What was I supposed to do? Just leave him there? I'm sorry, brother. Amita's a little touchy. I'll talk to her. As for Lakshmana, it sounds like it could be a temple or shrine. But if that's the case, it's in the north. The north is enemy territory, and we can't get you there, not yet.
The Golden Path seems a bit fractured. Amita has a point here, if I'm being honest. Sabal saved Ajay because he's Mohan's son. Being Mohan's son doesn't really mean much at the end of the day, though. But it has to, doesn't it? Ajay has to be special. He's the main character, the hero of the story. It means something, doesn't it? If I'm here in Kyrat, aren't I supposed to be doing something special? From here, the designers are already committing to make Far Cry 4 more free. The way the story works in this game is that there will be several campaign missions at once on the map, and the player must choose the order to do them in. After they are all complete, the next big choice mission happens. Here we must choose between Sabal or Amita's missions. I chose Amita's first. Here we meet Amita and Bhadra.
Sabal says I shouldn't be doing this.
I am teaching you to protect yourself. Ah, the tourist. I'm Amita. This is Bhadra.
Hi.
Keep walking. Look, I overreacted back there. We're at war. We keep losing soldiers, the work keeps piling up.
Is there anything I can do?
Ajay is tasked with helping an old woman with a pest infestation. While here, we can learn a bit about the past. Apparently, Pagan betrayed somebody, citing a cultural divide. This stockpile is an old weapons cache from back in 1987 in support of Mohan Ghale. Before heading for the pelts, I'd like you to listen to the ambiance of Kyrat. It's wonderful. Skip ahead if you don't care about it. Upon taking care of the pest infestation, we come to learn of a couple new mechanics, the new clean kill system and the karma system. If you kill an animal with a bow or a knife, they give you double pelts. It's harder to kill most animals this way, but trust me when I say it's worth it, even the rhinos, even if it takes a while. Doing this also adds to your karma level, which is an all-encompassing level to reflect your good deeds in Kyrat, or your bad deeds if you so choose. This level will decrease the cost of items in shops. This doesn't do much to improve upon the lackluster hunting experience from Far Cry 3, but it's something I suppose. Far Cry 4 seems keen to pile on things to do. Karma is just another system for the player to work towards. In my Far Cry 2 video, I mentioned how there's over 500 things to collect in that game, and that it was excessive and the highest in this series by count, besides maybe Far Cry 6, since I hadn't played much of that yet. Well, I'd like to correct myself, because when I did the math the first time, I must have screwed up Far Cry 4's numbers when calculating them, because there's over 650 things to collect in this game. It's ridiculous. I somehow got a little less than Far Cry 2 the first time I calculated it. I will definitely say that Far Cry 4 is the most collectathon collection simulator in the Far Cry franchise, including Far Cry 6. While I'm issuing corrections, I will also add that I was mistaken about Far Cry not having a silenced shotgun until Far Cry 5 in my Far Cry 2 video. There's actually a signature shotgun in this game that has one. This just came down to ineptitude. I went off memory because I was 95% sure, because how could I be wrong? I had 170 hours in the game. Well, I was. My apologies. I have started trying to check myself on these things in the Far Cry 3 video. I know it doesn't really affect anything at the end of the day, but it'll bug me until the end of time if I don't correct myself. So when AJ gets back with the pelts, we get a little bit of information on Bhadra.
Hey. Bhadra, how are you?
Good.
I brought you these pelts. I thought maybe you could use them.
These are good, Ajay. But you keep them. She has enough for her Tanka paintings.
I'm sorry, Tanka what?
This one is about the life of a guru. This one is about the demon Yalung. This one is about the goddess Kira. And that one is about Bhadra, the next Tarun Matara. The Tarun Matara is a living goddess, if you believe Sabal. It's no life for a child, being treated as an object, thing.
This sounds silly, but when I first played this game, seeing the inside of this little vehicle was so endearing. I love the little details. The details in this game are a huge step up from Far Cry 3. The sounds, the lighting, the places, all are more detailed than Far Cry 3. We're also finally, after 4 games, out of the jungle. Far Cry 2 of course had deserts and savannas at least, but Kyrat really takes the cake up to this point. There's more visual variation in colors and locations, there's greater heights and subsequently deeper valleys. Kyrat is a real visual treat. Far Cry 4 looks and feels decently 7th gen, but despite that, it's never hard to find yourself somewhere that looks just jaw-dropping. Enough gushing about Kyrat though, let's get back to Sabal and do his mission and...
What happened to him?
He fell. Pagan floods the airways and we have to endure his bullshit. Enough is enough! I told him to climb up the old bell tower, take over the transmitters, hijack the broadcast locally. Except...
I can do it.
Oh no, it's the goddamn radio towers again. He sends us to a bell tower that transmits propaganda. Ubisoft, we had enough of the radio towers. I don't need a second helping, thank you very much. On my way there, I found myself a new addition to the Far Cry world. Traveling merchants. They're just shops that move, nothing special about that, and they can also die. But it's a very welcome addition because they're around often enough that it's easy to find them. I bought myself a pistol and immediately regretted it. The damn thing sucks. I do this in almost every single playthrough and I never learn my lesson. Anyhow, the only way up to the bell tower is with a grappling hook. Ajay now has access to grappling points throughout the game. These allow for greater mobility in the world. The physics on the ropes are almost always just right, even if the visuals can get a little bit buggy at times. Though the bugs sometimes are visual and usually are, you'll find yourself hung up on things sometimes. Wait, are those bees? Motherfucking bees, my dudes. We got bees in Far Cry. A strange environmental hazard that I frequently forget about because they're kinda rare and don't really affect a whole lot. But Far Cry 4 is a certified bee swatting simulator now. Well, the radio tower did get something of an upgrade in the bell towers this game. The bell towers have a more boxy shape that allows the developers greater freedom in level design. It makes them more of a tolerable affair. But after climbing them for a whole game, I'm sick of them, and then I had to climb them for a whole other game. I've come down with tower fever, and now I'm allergic. The same criticisms as the previous game apply here, which if you did your homework, you already know, so I won't hark on about them again. These towers, as I said, are for propaganda, not communications. Here we hear a little bit of dictator bullshit being spewed to the masses.
The following is an announcement from the Ministry of Public Affairs and Social Harmony. Did you know that within 1 year after Pagan Min's arrival, violent crime in Iraq dropped by 99%? Keep Iraq safe for...
I guess Pagan Min thought 1984 was a user manual for running a country. After this, we meet one of the more strange characters in the game, Longinus. He's a Bible-thumping weapons dealer.
When Christ returns to break the 7 seals and bring about the rapture, he returns as a lion, yes? A lion needs teeth. What gun would Jesus choose? Deuteronomy 32:47? For there are no empty words for you, but your very life.
Upon getting to Banapur, this is where the first real open action sequence begins. I said open because Far Cry 4 has doubled down real hard on freedom, which applies to the main missions. Throughout this video, you'll see that there's not very many linear sections that feel like Far Cry 3. It's a real breath of fresh air. Far Cry 3 is leaning into that for its own narrative purposes, but Far Cry 4 doesn't have much of a reason to. It's a boon to the player's enjoyment. At the end of the section, Ajay saves Badra from a burning building, and we see more of the cracked foundation upon which this insurgency movement sits.
I'm alright.
The people need to see her. It'll comfort them.
She's just a child, Sabal, and she's terrified. I'll take her home, and then we'll worry about the people, okay? Thank you.
You're okay.
This is what we get for rescuing Ajay. We hit Paul's house, he slaughters a village.
This isn't on Ajay, it's on me. We can't worry about that now. They took the outpost, and they have hostages.
Fine. The outpost first. Without it, we're cut off from the others.
There's an important detail here about Pagan Min. The Golden Path attacked the player's compound to save Ajay, to which the answer was retaliation. Pagan didn't even order this attack, and likely doesn't have even much knowledge of it. The next mission is a familiar sight if you played Blood Dragon. It's a hostage rescue. These function mostly the same, except they have 4 hostages, and they actually do die when you get spotted. You also only fail the mission if there are 2 or more of them dead. I constantly enjoy these missions and always love the additional pleasure of knowing that if I get caught, it's over for real unless I act at breakneck speeds. When that's finished, Ajay mentions that he's not here for the Golden Path stuff, and Sabal assures him that they'll find this place called Lakshmana.
I didn't come here for my father, or any of this.
We could still use your help, brother. Look at the difference you've made. I know, I'm asking a lot from you, but helping the Golden Path will take you to Lakshmana. I promise you that. We'll find it together.
Thanks, Sabal.
Amita also calls and puts Ajay on blast for breaking up the plan.
I know that Sabal put you up to rescuing the hostages instead of taking back the outpost. It's okay. You're new here, and Sabal can be very persuasive.
I just wanted to do my part.
And I appreciate that, but you have to see the bigger picture. I was already making arrangements to deal with the outpost, but now I have to retask my fighters so they can protect the hostages you rescued.
Protect them from what?
Diplo. He doesn't like losing his playthings. Don't you see, Ajay? There was a plan, and now it's fallen apart. It will be a while before things with Diplo blow over. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers in that outpost will have plenty of time to dig in.
Not if I can help it.
Ajay, attacking that outpost on your own would be suicide. Wait until we can give you the proper support.
I can do this, Amita.
Ajay, don't...
I'm starting to feel like I'm stuck between two angry parents always arguing. Outposts are nearly identical to Far Cry 3 in terms of gameplay, except for they follow the South Island's more open level design. You'll never really find walls surrounding an outpost entirely, if there's walls at all. And being situated in the Himalayas, there's more vantage points for sniping and aerial bombardments. I prefer these more than the previous games. Another small change is that in Far Cry 3, you only had to kill the original pirates in the outpost plus any reinforcements that show up. If there's any other enemies around otherwise, they'll just despawn upon completion. In this game, if Ajay has enemies around, he must kill them before the outpost is completed. It's a small change I didn't even notice until making the series, but once I did notice it in Far Cry 3, it was a bit jarring. Completing this one, we get another conversation with Amita.
First the hostages, then the outpost. You're not much of a listener, Ajay, but I have to admit, you've done a good job today.
Thanks. It just felt like the right thing to do.
Your mother would be proud. You want to reach, Lakshmana? Getting there won't be easy. We lost the north to Pagan Min years ago and we're struggling here in the south.
I promised my mom I'd bring her ashes there. It was her dying wish.
Think about it, Ajay. Your mother knew exactly what would happen once you showed up here in Kirat. The son of Mohan Kale returning to the war-torn land of his birth. Ishwari was a smart woman. You being here and helping our cause is no accident. Stand with us, Ajay. Join the Golden Path, and I promise you, you will fulfill your mother's dying wish. Whether it was to spread her ashes at Lakshmana, or to accomplish something greater.
This conversation bugs me. After playing this game so much, I've begun to wonder if the Golden Path knew that Lakshmana was a person, not a place. This pretty much marks the end of the tutorial section. I quite like this opening and tutorial a lot. People underestimate how hard it is to make a functional tutorial that isn't cumbersome, and I really don't think this one is cumbersome. I appreciated it. From here, we're finally more or less set loose on Kyrat to discover more about it. Far Cry 2 dealt with the concepts of imperialism, greed, power, war, and the way this all piles up into a cycle never ending. It took a look at a specific part of Africa for inspiration. Far Cry 3 took a huge step back in that department, not because they didn't try, but because it did little to understand the part of the world inhabited. Far Cry 4 on the other hand made leaps and bounds, surpassing Far Cry 2 in my opinion, though ultimately still failing a tiny bit flat in some aspects. So we know why Far Cry 3 failed to address its own white saviorism. Ubisoft knew this as well. They took the criticism quite well actually, despite what the lead writer of Far Cry 3 would make you think. As a side note, this leads me to realizing just how much Ubisoft has actually listened to the fans when developing Far Cry. I wasn't expecting to see so much criticism be taken head on, but they did and continue to throughout the series. Anyway, the narrative director of Far Cry 3 stayed on for Far Cry 4 and he took the critiques seriously. A refreshing sight to behold. I'll give some spoilers for this video. I think Far Cry 4 adequately addresses the white savior critique of Far Cry 3, but the way it got there wasn't really the correct way. That sounds weird, so I'll just try to explain it. Here's what the narrative director Mark Tonson had to say.
The first thing we said was, this guy is from Kyrat. No matter what happens, the most important thing is that he's part of this world. He belongs here. That's where his parents are from. That's where his family are from. So when you go back there, it's a place you belong to. Everything you do is part of your history and culture and background. The Jason Brodies this time around are the bad guys. The outsiders who come in and try and have their escapist white savior fantasy are actually the bad guys. So it's like an evolution of us trying to find our own ideas.
This statement is such a gold mine for conversation. I'll start with the second part. The Jason Brodies this time around are the bad guys. Yes, they are, but he also was in the previous game. Jason was never intended to be a good guy. He was a protagonist, but not a good guy. It's funny to me that he worded it that way, because Jason Brody was always meant to be perceived as a bad guy. Does he think Jason was intended to be a good guy? I'm glad he took the criticism to heart, but this comment makes me question how well-rounded his understanding was. It's always possible he didn't speak as clearly as he meant to, and he does or did understand it. Next, I want to bring up Ajay being from Kyrat. This is a very interesting way to try to address the white savior trope. In my opinion, it doesn't actually address it. Why? Take a real-world example. I live in a city with a high population of South American immigrants, and their families born here in the US. When I ask a friend if they are Mexican, for example, they'll answer yes. That makes perfect sense. Ajay would think of himself as Karate most likely, but functionally, my friend who was born and raised in the US is much more tied to US culture, not Mexican culture. They reflected this idea when they returned to Mexico to visit their family last year, telling me how strange it was that they felt like they shouldn't feel like it's a foreign country, because they speak the language, know the food, and know the people who live there. This is a common sentiment I've heard echoed before with other friends throughout my life when they go and visit their family back in South America. It's one that was brought up ad nauseum when Trump made his best effort to deport children and teens back to Mexico, because racists think the only country south of the border is Mexico apparently. Many teens and children interviewed mentioned that the places they would end up going were functionally foreign to them, despite having parents from there who grew up there. It's distressing. That's why I don't think Ajay really functions as a Karate returning home in the way the developers intended. He functions as a story as a white savior because he's still an outsider returning to a country and saving them all without much actual understanding of these people. At least, that's what I'd say if the game didn't end the way it did. But we'll get there when we do, like I said. Far Cry 4 does address the white savior trope. I just don't think it happened in the way the devs thought it would. Is Ajay white? Not entirely. This conversation could go on for hours alone. Deconstructing what whiteness is, well, it's a lot. Something I will not be doing here, but to keep it brief, Ajay grew up in the US having moved here at age 4. He talks like a US citizen. He walks like one. He is one. And the US is of course ostensibly white and tied up in white culture, but he's still from Asia. Though he has facial features and a skin tone that lends itself closely enough to white beauty standards, he more or less probably fit in as a white person in the US without feeling too othered. Ajay likely feels and acted very white is what I'm saying. There's an interesting bit of intersectionality going on here. Oh no, I said the feminist word. Now 4chan is going to hate brigade me for the rest of eternity. Oh well, it's a badge of honor in my eyes. But for real, the way Ajay's karate heritage and US life clash together probably ends up leaving him with a mostly US taste in his mouth. I mean hell, he even calls himself AJ Gale for the whole game. He literally doesn't know how his name is said back in Kyrat. He also doesn't seem to even understand the culture, or the people, or who's in charge, or where his family is from, or anything about the religion. Finally, in this quote, he says Ajay belongs in Kyrat. I ask on what grounds. He grew up in the US. He speaks English, eats McDonald's, and watches Keeping Up with the Kardashians, probably. Okay, probably not. But does he not belong in the US? Does he belong in both places? I think for the reasons stated in my last point, you can understand why this is a bit confusing to me. Anyway, all this leads up to Ajay functioning as a white savior, save for the ending, and we'll get there, but I want to mention briefly that the mechanism behind a white savior can function with any group identity, not just a white person in a non-white group. The mechanism behind this idea is that someone can be powerful enough, skilled enough, advanced enough, that they can single-handedly save an entire group of people with ease because they're just so much more civilized and advanced. It's just that the savior complex is almost always represented by a white savior complex because white people have historically had a near monopoly on the stories told to the whole world. Our books, TV shows, video games are exported everywhere all the time, and before that, the racist ideals of the British Empire were being spread far and wide around the globe due to how powerful it was and great it was. I thought I'd mention it because the same problematic ideals can work and be used in other non-white groups, and that's worth remembering, not necessarily just for this game, but just in general. Creating a fictional place that feels tied to a real culture is a feat in of itself, one that Ubisoft Montreal took seriously in creating this next game for the franchise. This is what I mean when I say Ubisoft does seem to listen to criticism. at least some of the time. Though this was 10 years ago, so it's probably changed, but we'll see how that fares out later in the series. In a video released by PlayStation Europe, the YouTube channel, we get an interesting glimpse into the mindset behind the Far Cry 4 story. There's a particular quote I find quite insightful about what the devs expected when leaving for Nepal, because unlike Far Cry 3, they actually went and visited a place they wished to represent.
Nepal also suggests like a lot of different kinds of environments, right? How are you going to feel going from sort of the virtual world that you have created into the new world that we're going to?
In my head, I have this Wikipedia idea of what Nepal is. I've been reading about what makes it the way it is right now, what's been happening over the last 10 years, the last 1,000 years. But I'm hoping that we can uncover something that isn't presented on the web.
The expectations are going to be super high. After Far Cry 3, we really want to push it and bring it to the next level.
It's super important that the environment you're in feels believable. Like you can look around and understand the space and it feels like a real place from the real world. So being able to go to some of those locations is super interesting and super useful, just to see how the ground crunches under your feet and just the tiny little textures like that. And we can try and bring that extra level of authenticity.
I'm glad that the team was able to find some connection to a real place and real people. It made the game, even as someone who isn't Nepali, feel more grounded when I first played years ago. There's also a noticeable increase in folk from that area of the world, usually India, saying how special it is to them and how the game felt quite representative. This is something I literally have never seen a single person say about Far Cry 3, yet it's not hard to find in any comment section about Far Cry 4, Let's Plays or reviews or anything like that, saying that the game is special to them for that reason. It's a great step, I'd say. But if you'd ask me, the Far Cry 4 could have taken a bit of a step further and included a person who actually worked on the team, who was actually from that area of the world to help give constant feedback on the game and how it represented the culture. I mentioned the way people respond to this game in comment sections and user reviews over the journalists and professional critics because I think it's important to understand that the ones who hold the microphone don't always necessarily hold the common opinion, and are a very small group of individuals compared to the entire player base. This means they are likely to wholly miss out on perspectives and ideas that the player base actually hold. Take into account that a massive amount of the people working in those fields are also Westerners from English-speaking countries, while user comments show a much more diverse set of opinions from all about the world. It's important to see what a lot of people talking about what the representation of their culture actually feels like, and what they're saying on the matter. Anyway, the way these developers traveled to Nepal, it feels as if there's some uneasy parallels to a couple of the characters in this game. Two of the side characters that were mostly comic relief and generally forgettable are Yogi and Reggie, or Reggie, maybe, I call him Reggie, two stoners who have traveled to Kyrat as a way to experience the local herb, as it were. They're drug tourists, here to partake in Kyrat as a superficial place to use as a background for their drug trips. Mostly they serve to give the drug trip sequences seen in the game, but the parallel to me feels a bit close to the way Ubisoft flew some people over to Nepal to take pictures and stuff, only to return with a mostly superficial understanding of the region. And that's not for a lack of trying, by the way. Now, the similarity is, of course, tenuous and on shaky ground. Yogi and Reggie are there for drugs, and the devs are there for, well, research. But I can't unmake that connection I made as I watch these videos. It's some Westerners using a real place as a backdrop for an experience they are creating. For the stoners, it's getting high, obviously, and for the devs, it is more nuanced as for creating a game. They want to gain a respect for the place they were attempting to partially represent, and that's a worthy cause, but it's a big leap from an authentic, true understanding of the place that a local citizen could have provided if allowed to be more than a small part in a behind-the-scenes series. I don't say this to disparage the devs or the studio. God knows there's plenty to disparage Ubisoft over, though. It was a good step in a good direction. But I think it's easy to forget the way we're using this place with a real culture and a real history to make a game of a fictional setting. It's a cynical perspective, I know, but I'm a cynical person. The way we white people use other people's histories as a setting for a story, and the way we're very disconnected from that can kind of just rub me the wrong way sometimes. That's really what I'm trying to say. It's obviously a very complex, touchy issue that my voice alone isn't equipped to tackle, and besides, plenty of other YouTubers already have done a way better job than I ever could have. Another aspect of this is the music. It's phenomenal, but it probably wouldn't surprise you to learn it was written by a white dude. It sounds stereotypically Indian, kind of like the way that Westerners imagine Indian music. And though it may be really good sounding, it does include like actual Indian singers and stuff singing in Hindi, it still was scored by a dude from New York, not Nepal or India. Brass tacks of this whole situation is that Ubisoft could have done more than they did, but I appreciate their willingness to take a step up after Far Cry 3 and try to do better. Speaking of inspirations for Far Cry 4, there's an elephant in the room. pun intended. The Nepalese War was a protracted and bloody conflict between Maoist insurgents and the army of the royal family in Nepal. The war started in 1996 and continued until 2006. During that time, much happened to talk about, but this isn't a history channel, so the short and sweet of it is that in 1996, there had already been a build-up to a conflict for some years. A group of Maoists began the conflict with 7 coordinated attacks on the monarchist government. This started 10 years of war. 5 years later, skipping over plenty of stuff obviously, the king and his family were massacred in the palace in 2001. Peace talks were held and were unsuccessful before the conflict became worse than it ever had been. Eventually, the government and the Maoists came to peace in 2006. After several unsuccessful attempts to end the conflict. That's a very brief recounting of the conflict. The Far Cry team specifically and wisely decided not to pursue a game that would retell the story of this war or any other wars, but the inspirations are clear. In the early years of the war, the Maoists split into 2 different factions, one representing a more militant side. I'm sure this was the inspiration for Amida and Sabal being a split faction in the Golden Path. Naturally, the writers made sure these two were very ideologically opposed, though I'm not so sure that's how it was actually in that real-life war. Amida is a militant leader who seems to fall somewhat to the left, though the game doesn't really expand on it much. She's more progressive on social issues like including feminism, but also being open to using drug money to fund the Golden Path, something that Sabal, of course, despises. As far as economics, she could fall anywhere between neoliberalism and anarchy. It's not very clear, though I side closer to assuming liberalism with a smattering of socialism. Sabal is much more of a traditionalist. He basically worships the ground Ajay walks on in honor of Mohan. He believes in child marriage and maintaining a spiritual connection to Kirat's past. His economics are not mentioned at all, but one could assume he prefers a monarchy given the way he seems to believe Ajay should become the leader of Kirat by the end of the game, if not himself. These 2 characters represent a social commentary on the way a conflict like the Kirat Civil War can have its own actors on either side who are very much in disagreement with each other. The game shies away from discussing economic systems though, I've noticed. In the Nepalese War, the king and his family were slaughtered. The exact same thing happens in Far Cry 4 as well, in a very close way. The Golden Path killed the royal family. You guys, what the fuck are you guys doing? Jesus Christ, my cats are going nuts. The Golden Path killed the royal family. This didn't stop the monarchy from continuing though, because Pagan Min got access to the throne when he helped a distant heir in China establish power. Pagan Min apparently had a mercenary army. That's not really explained. Why did he have an entire mercenary army in China? Like, how did he just have that? Anyway, helping install the new king, Min backstabbed him and installed himself. All that Pagan Min stuff is quite made up. That kind of thing did not happen in Nepal. It was much more straightforward in Nepal. Ultimately, all the Far Cry team's inspiration that came from this real place with a real history did a great job of bringing together a game that felt more spatially cohesive. That was something that lacked big time in the previous game, and I'm glad to see the devs able to create an experience that could lend itself to authenticity, even in a fictional place like Kirat. I mentioned Yogi and Reggie previously, so I want to quickly get them out of the way. They are one of the more lame characters in the game and offer some of the worst side content. Basically, each mission of theirs involves a drug trip. These drug trips are interesting for about 40 seconds before they become tedious. The cutscenes beforehand can be funny as we watch Ajay slowly get used to the idea of getting stabbed with a needle, but otherwise these missions are just Ajay wandering around some section of Kirat and seeing some wacky shit. Sure, the colorful shader and weird happenings are fun the first time, but it quickly outstayed its welcome. The story of Yogi and Reggie ends with them giving Ajay a very nice pipe to smoke from. Then they're just gone. Yogi and Reggie actually are fairly funny characters, but the entertainment stops when they leave the screen. The other side content that they give you access to are the Tonka paintings. These are paintings that depict the mystical past of Kirat. Upon first meeting them, Ajay now can go out to the world and find these paintings, at which case he enters a dreamlike state. These Tonka paintings are also owned by Mohan and kept in the Gali estate. They were assumed destroyed, but now Ajay can go find them. Pagan Min famously was anti-religious and had been making a point of destroying religious artifacts, including, it was assumed, these Tonka paintings. There are a handful to find, and what order you do them in doesn't matter. The story in the Tonka paintings retell the myth of Kalanag. He had been entrusted with the task of finding Shangri-La, a paradise on Earth that is hidden in the Himalayas, by his king. The implication of this opening act is that one must die to find Shangri-La. Upon entering the paradise, I have to say that it lives up to the name. Shangri-La is one of the prettiest places I've seen in a game, and definitely the prettiest in this game. Kalanag finds a tiger that has been mortally wounded and retrieves what he calls a tooth. I don't know about y'all, but that doesn't really look like a tooth to me. Like, what tooth has a handle on it? Anyway, Paradise on Earth is under attack. Kalanag soon finds out that a demon army is here wreaking havoc on the lands. He mentions that he shouldn't be surprised that even a paradise like this isn't impervious to the evil will of others. In development, Shangri-La went through a bit of a development hell. It was slated to be an additional little open world, but when the creators behind the project left, it turned into a multiple stage linear section instead. This didn't really bug me. The level design was still open enough that it didn't feel just like hallways leading to other hallways. The issue is that combat is very haphazard. Far Cry doesn't do melee well at all, especially in these older ones, so they had to mostly rely on giving the player a special bow. You also get command of a tiger. The demons can be killed with a takedown or an arrow to the face, except the heavy enemies who are invincible unless they get stunned or are being mauled by the tiger, which I guess that still counts as stunning. Then you can actually do a takedown. Later on you get a bow that shoots 5 arrows instead of 1. It basically means headshots are easier because you don't have to be as accurate. The bow slows down time as well, which is kind of interesting, but it never quite felt right to me. As far as traversal, it's all the same old running and climbing, except for they kind of bring in a bit of the wingsuit mechanic for this. The problem is that the flying mechanic here has no camera control. It's very awkward. You can only control Kalanag through your directional input, so it'd be WASD or your joystick. But it is pretty spectacular, so I'll give them that, because everywhere you go in Shangri-La, there's spectacle to behold. There's also an elephant later on to ride too, which is pretty neat. The whole way through these levels, you'll see how the corruption is slowly darkening the world. The level design itself never really gets old, because the aesthetic design slowly gets more complex and stylized just beyond red trees, grass, and water. There's also more dead animals, more enemies. It's nice to increase the tension via world building and level design. The final level is actually just a boss fight. It's probably the only Far Cry boss fight I don't actively dislike. This one is okay. There's no multiple stages or increase in complexity as the fight goes on. It's all spectacle again, and that's okay. It overstays its welcome pretty easily though. At least the Far Cry 3 boss fight was rather quick. The ending of Kalanag's journey arrives at this boss fight, and he tells how he realized that paradise was within everyone, all the time. Paradise is to believe in something beyond yourself. He also says, "Dear painter, is that enough for your Tonka?" Which implies someone actually got the story from Kalanag and that he actually existed. Though if the story was just made up is up for debate, but I'm erring on just made up. Overall, the Shangri-La section is about an hour to 2 hours long, but almost feels too long eventually. It's pretty easy to speed run through it on a repeat playthrough, but on my first few times I often wished it was shorter. It suffers from the same issue that Far Cry always suffers from when it does level design with limited weapon options. There's no sandbox. Far Cry has been and always will be the best when it allows options, even all the way back in 2004. There wasn't much of a sandbox in that one, but still had options for the player. Overall, the best drug trip type stuff in all the Far Cry games comes from Shangri-La, and I enjoyed its inclusion.
No! You're a trouble!
I would not want to walk in there right now.
What are they arguing about?
Pagan Min soldiers are about to attack one of our camps. Amita thinks our priority should be the information the fighters have gathered. Sabal thinks saving our people is more important.
How long have they been at it?
Long enough. The argument never changes and their positions never move.
Here we see the first mission where the player must make a choice between Amita and Sabal, at the expense of the other leader. The issue here is that Amita wants to gather intel on the upcoming attack, while Sabal wants to focus on saving individual soldiers. This is where we see the difference in mindset with these two. Amita thinks more in grand strategy, willing to sacrifice individuals to save a greater number of lives in the future. The issue here is that the intel might be useless, and we'll have to let some soldiers die for nothing if that's the case. It's like the trolley problem, but you're not actually sure if the diverting the train will actually decrease the number of deaths or not. When I first played this game, I gave into Sabal's honeyed words that stroked Ajay's ego. In this mission, he also seemed more reasonable to me, because I always thought it was better to save those soldiers rather than take a gamble on the intel that might be worthwhile later, or not. I chose Sabal again. Unlike most games with branching paths, Far Cry 4 actually does vary gameplay a little bit for each choice. You won't get radically different gameplay, just different objectives that inform how you go about your mission. It's a welcome addition to Far Cry, and it's mission structure that Ubisoft never really brought back for the entire Far Cry series. In this mission, for example, if you side with Sabal, you'll have the time to prepare for an attack and you'll defend the rebels in a tower defense defense sort of way. If you side with Amita, you'll approach the camp and everyone will be dead, and it basically acts like an outpost with more enemies who are more difficult. These enemies are hunters, soldiers who only use bows and can't be tagged for more than a few seconds. They're silent and can also call wolves to attack. Enemy variation is always nice to see, but it's not exactly a revelatory addition to combat. At the end of each of these choice missions, whoever you choose will become the leader of the Golden Path. Whoever is in charge doesn't matter until the end of the game. The only thing that changes are certain cutscenes and who calls Ajay throughout the game to pat him on the back over stuff he did.
Sabal. A champion returns. Defending that rebel camp saved a lot of lives.
You guys put me in a difficult position.
Amita would have let our people die, and for what? For intel that we may or may not have needed? The right choice was obvious, brother. It's what your father would have done. That's the Golden Path. That's the direction we were going before Mohan died. That's why I stepped up. Because I knew your father. And I respected his vision.
And where does Amita fit into all this?
Look, I'll be the first to give her credit. But you don't need two heads. Not if you want to get work done. That's something your father taught me.
After this, Sabal aggrandizes Ajay a bit more, before sending him to a monastery to learn more about the religion that inspired Mohan. This sees Ajay walking through the monastery being told about the mythology and the wisdom of the religion. The royal army then attacks the monastery, and this acts as a bit of a control point sort of section. There are 3 bomb sites that the royal army will attempt to arm, and Ajay must run around and disarm them. It's a fun section. This is how much of the campaign plays out. It's a lot of objectives that feel a lot like multiplayer type objectives you'd see in Halo or Call of Duty. I enjoy it a lot more than Far Cry 3 because of its freedom. When this is over, Ajay can meet with Bhadra and learn a bit more about Mohan.
Paying respect to the families.
I have never seen anything like this.
I've never seen anyone carry around their mother's ashes.
Yeah. You think my father's funeral was like this?
I was too young. But I know his death broke the Golden Path. Things would be different now if he died fighting. But he didn't. He was murdered.
Murdered? Whoa, wait, what happened?
All I know is that he was killed in his house east of Banapur. It's still there. Maybe you could go there and find out more about him. Just be careful. That area belongs to Noor now. I have to go.
I like the little clash of culture here. Ajay is intrigued by the body burning, while Bhadra finds it funny to see someone carry the ashes around. A little while later, Ajay is brought back into a fight between Amita and Sabal. The current predicament is that there are poppy fields that, well, exist, and 2 leaders disagree on what to do.
Amita.
Ajay, Longinus said this was from you. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. He also said the opium at the old tea factory was ready to ship. We need to wipe that poison out.
Wipe it out? Are you joking? We need to secure that shipment and those fields.
Amita, we talked about this. Turning Kyrat into a drug state is not the answer.
Sabal, we have no natural resources. What happens when we're free? The mines have been stripped, the fields have been ruined for years. So we liberate our people, then what?
It's not our way. It never was. You do this, you're no better than pagan. It's morally bankrupt.
Better than being literally bankrupt.
I choose Amita. She tasks Ajay with keeping the fields from burning. The royal army will attempt to burn them, and Ajay must turn on sprinklers to stop that. It's the same sort of gameplay as a monastery, multiple locations under attack in a wave-based arena. The difference here is that Ajay must take over that place first, so it's basically an outpost first and then an arena. Ball isn't too happy about it, obviously. A few more missions later, and we get more Noor after meeting Yogi and Reggie for the first time, where they drug Ajay and take him to her.
Just listen, please. Paul has my family. Until I know they're safe, I'm trapped here doing whatever Pagan wants me to do.
What does this have to do with me?
The Golden Path wants Paul dead. I need my family safe. We can help each other.
She's a US citizen who found herself stuck co-running a gladiator-style arena, plus taking care of poppy refinement and the brothels in that region. DePleur has taken her family captive and uses this leverage to keep her in Kyrat. Her backstory is that she was a doctor working in an aid organization in Kyrat early in Pagan Min's reign. She published a couple of papers on the human rights abuses she witnessed there. This spurred Min to put together a 12-step process for helping establish better practices in Kyrat, and it turned out to actually be a pretty good plan. He presented this to her as a presentation held in his palace, where he had invited her and her whole family. After this presentation, being optimistic but still a bit prudent, she continued to talk about the abuses. So Min kidnapped her and her family and gave them to DePleur. She was then forced to work under Min with the threat that her family would be harmed. This threat has continued to this day. It's a tough dilemma for most. I know this is a controversial take, but I prefer Paul just kill me and my family than continue on to do all that Nor ended up doing. To many people out there, they do any number of awful things in the name of family without a second thought, and that's a very common mindset, though if people would actually follow through with that, you can't really tell. It's not hard to find people saying they'd burn down the whole world for their children. I'm no parent, so obviously I can't specifically speak about this because it doesn't specifically apply to me, but I couldn't bring myself to just become like a slave trafficker in the hopes my family wouldn't die. That's disgusting. My family also wouldn't want me to do that either. For this reason, I judge Nor pretty harshly for her actions. It's just not excusable to commit horrid crimes against thousands and thousands of people to save a few people you care about. Most people obviously wouldn't take anything that far, and this is a pretty over-the-top sort of a situation, but the general consensus is that Nor is a sympathetic character to some extent. I'd say she's only sympathetic to the very smallest degree possible. Getting into the weeds of her actions is interesting because there's several allusions to how she really does seem to enjoy what she's doing here. She runs brothels, holds massive orgies in her stronghold, and keeps slaves in the gladiator arena. She seems to enjoy it to an extent. All these years later, she actually believes that her family is alive. Surely she understands how far-fetched it is that they've been kept alive for so long. No, I think she more or less knows they're not alive, and she keeps up this lie in her head to justify her cruelty to the people of Kyrat. She's a person who needed a justification for the vile way she's enacted her own will upon the world before her. She sought power and she got it. It's ironic, given her origin story as a doctor. She's not so different from Pagan, from Voss, from the Jackal, from Amida, from Sabal, from Ajay. Well, she helps Ajay survive the arena by giving him a kukri. She's basically testing his mettle to see if he's actually up for the task of saving her family. Though I wonder if she'd quit all of this that she's done here if that actually happened. So this is the introduction to the arena, Far Cry 4's special feature. This arena is exactly what it sounds like. In here you get an arena rank to work at, which unlocks new guns and skills for Ajay. You also have gun-based challenges. For every gun in the game, you get to use that weapon in a 5-round arena fight. It's honestly really fun. There's of course an endless mode as well. The arena is actually very well designed. The audience will throw items and weapons in the region consistently and occasionally, which will be marked with colored smoke depending on what it is. Multiple factions are released so Ajay can watch them pick each other off, or just get right into the fighting. And there's also animals. It's a shit ton of fun to slowly build your way up round after round and see how long you can go. I assume this wasn't a very popular feature though because it wasn't returned later in the series. There's also a really annoying issue with it. Ubisoft made a companion app to go along with the arena. This was back when smartphones were starting to get much more mass adoption because they were getting cheaper and more user-friendly. Apps suddenly became the cool thing in the world of gaming, so Ubisoft made a companion app. That's cool and all, and I couldn't care less except for the very dumb fact that the arena progress is tracked across accounts, not playthroughs. So on replays, your progress carries over. Then when the app stopped, getting supported and whatnot, this was never changed. There's no way to reset progress without making a new account and buying the game again. I'm glad this trend is over, but the stains still linger. Far Cry 4 has 16 distinct side missions. Recall that Far Cry 3 had only 4 types. Part of the difference here is that the developers varied missions from 3 by creating sub-variants of those missions, such as hunting. Now you have 3 different types. One where you must kill some animals somewhere with whatever weapons you please, one where you must kill them with a specified weapon, and one where you must kill them with a bow or a knife and collect their pelts. Adjacent to the hunting missions are the Karate Fashion Week missions, which are identical to the Path of the Hunter missions from Far Cry 3. The setup here is that this guy wants to make a combat-ready, high-fashion outfit for Ajay. They often have mildly funny dialogue, but generally aren't that great. I mean, it's mildly funny that the honey badger has a dead rhino at its location to imply that it killed a whole ass rhino, and the damn thing does eat bullets, but it's not the most compelling side content there is. This game kept Far Cry 3's vehicle driving challenges, except that there's no longer supply drops. They're for a woman who is filming Ajay for those good old internet updates. Generally, these are fairly boring, just like the previous game, except for a few that are mildly varied by swapping between different vehicles. Far Cry has never had exceptionally fun travel. The best was Far Cry 2 because the fast travel system was so limited you actually had to use your map for your movements. So these missions end up just being a bit boring and repetitive. These did have two different types of sub-missions, one where you must complete it in as fast as possible, and one where you must do it in the allotted time, with each circle giving you a few extra seconds. Still doesn't make it much fun though. I've already discussed the hostage rescues. These almost entirely just show up as side missions, and they're some of my favorites. The supply drop missions from Far Cry 3 did return in the film missions here, but the devs did replace those supply drop missions with Golden Path supplies. In these, you're tasked with picking up 1 or 2 pieces of cargo and delivering it to some sort of a bunker. These are mildly entertaining because the devs intentionally added enemies or an animal at each pickup point, and oftentimes along the route that the player is most likely to travel. These are generally mildly entertaining because the devs intentionally added enemies or animals at each pickup point, and oftentimes along that route the player is most likely to travel. The interesting thing about these missions is that the final one ends with Ajay going to a drop-off location at a bunker, and the guy there is dead. Turns out he wasn't part of the Golden Path, nor the King's Army. There were hints throughout the missions with his dialogue that made it sound as if you were being tricked the whole time, so it wasn't really that big of a surprise if you actually paid attention. Who this guy is, though, is up for debate in the fandom. There's a few notes he has that indicate he and another team of people were here to set up in Kyrat. To do what exactly is kind of unknown. I'd assume drug trafficking, but others have proposed some sort of documentary crew or CIA involvement. Overall, they're alright missions. Another one of my favorites is the Eye for an Eye missions. These see Ajay killing a target with a specified weapon. These are quite fun. They're basically mini outposts with an objective for killing someone with a specific gun. It's a fairly similar feel to the assassination quests that also see Ajay with a specific target he must kill. The difference here is he must use stealth and can use any weapon. He must also take a picture of each target. On a practical level, it's easiest just to kill everyone in these missions, but you actually don't have to. You can just kill all the targets. Some of these missions get unreasonably difficult in the later game, which I really appreciate. Like this one that requires Ajay to kill 3 targets with an assault rifle in this canyon type thing. One of those targets is a heavy enemy that takes like 5 mags of ammo to kill. You can't take the easy way out with explosives or a heavy takedown. That's just a cherry on top of the level design. Almost all these enemies can see you very easily as you approach the camp, and it's really hard to kill anyone, and it's really hard to just kill everybody with stealth, besides that heavy obviously because you have to just shoot him straight up. It's an incredibly unforgiving mission, and I really enjoyed it because it's not very often you see AAA games just make really hard missions in their games. The other is this training camp where the placement of enemies makes it nearly impossible to kill anyone without others noticing. So I usually just end up sniping. This is a stealth-only mission, so that's what's so unforgiving about it. I quite enjoyed both of them. You've got bomb defusings, where a camp of enemies has 3 bombs that will trigger if you get caught. I usually just get caught and disarm them in time. It's fun. There's armed escorts where you have to sit atop a truck and kill enemies while protecting the cargo. These are alright, though they often have stretches of time that feel a little too long without much happening. This is another mission type with an unreasonably difficult mission as well. In this one you have a helicopter that will shred your truck's health in seconds if you don't kill it immediately. You're basically guaranteed to lose the first time because it comes up from behind you and you probably won't notice it. It's also a helicopter, so it's hard to hit. It starts shooting you from quite a distance away, so you're pretty much guaranteed to take a bit of damage before you kill it, so you need to be full health before it even tries to attack you. This just felt like the devs fucking with me, the way that like FromSoft tends to do with their games. I really liked it. Throughout the world, you'll fairly often see the King's Army driving cargo around in these big trucks. They spawn infinitely, even after you finish the story. In order to do 100% completion, you must destroy 3 of them and hijack 3 of them. Destroying 3 of them is obviously quite easy. Hijacking is also fairly easy, but takes more time. You just have to drive them to an outpost marked on your map, though sometimes it felt a little bit weirdly bugged for me. Another infinitely spawning thing is Pagan's Wrath. These are 3 jeeps with mounted turrets that will spawn doing a circuit around a particular part of the map. For this reason, you can actually set up ambushes on them. Naturally, they're pretty tough for most of the game because there's 3 turrets raining down bullets. This is definitely a mechanic taken from a bunch of Far Cry 2 missions where you must destroy a similar type of mortarcade. I really enjoyed taking the time to set up an ambush for them in my first playthrough, though these days I just like to do them when I see them and track them down on a gyrocopter and bombard them from the air. There's a weird quirk about them though, and that's that they actually don't stop when they've been attacked, the way every other enemy does. So you have to be quick about destroying them, usually the first one in line to ensure the others are slowed down. It's a lot of fun and really plays well into the sandbox. So these different kind of side content missions are pretty neat, and they're more or less the last of their kind in the Far Cry series. I'll talk more about that in the Far Cry 5 episode though. But the neat thing here about them is that they're still pretty free as far as player choice when it comes to weapons and approaches, but still apply a little bit of pressure on the player anyway. Often games work best with a little bit of pressure on the player to act a certain way. In fact, most games are very heavy-handed with it. But sandbox games are different because they offer absolute freedom most of the time. But even still, the small amount of pressure to adhere to a certain objective is quite fun for people, such as a hunger system or a temperature system, things like that.
So you're the guy on the radio? Yeah, that's me. The voice of Radio Free Kirat, Rabbi Ray Rana. Look, you fight with your brawn, but I fight with my words, and you know the old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword.
At some point you'll hear the radio host of the non-propaganda radio. His name is Rabbi Ray Rana, and he's fucking annoying. This character perplexes me. I'm not sure if he was intended to be an ironic character or not, or if they're attempting to play him straight as comedic relief. Either way, anytime he says something funny, it goes on for about 2 to 5 times longer than it should, like this one for example.
Hey, random question. Do you use a bidet? I mean, like, I noticed the work that you're doing a lot of running around, definitely a lot of sweating. You're probably wearing the same pair of underwear for 12 to 36 hours at a time, given the type of work you're doing. You've got to have some bad chafing going on right now, Yar.
You could have just stopped there. Robbie Ray pointing out in a fairly meta way that Ajay would definitely be chafing is an alright joke. It's mildly funny because it's aware of the ridiculous way action heroes in these games never change clothes and never really take a break. It's an inoffensive alright joke for the first little bit, then it just continues for way too fucking long.
I'm serious. I mean, the itchy asshole symptoms you must be having must be crazy. And having a clean asshole when you're defeating evil is very important. Am I doing that random thing where I trail off and lose you again? I'm sorry, dude, but really, I really do care about you, man. And I mean from top to bottom. I mean, from the food that you eat to the type of lota you use to clean your butt, because it's all really necessary. Okay, just ignore me. Good luck with the propaganda center.
You know, even as a 17-year-old who had been terminally online for about 6 years at that point in my formative years, I found few of his jokes even funny. And I'm pretty sure I was the target audience. He's also very weirdly Americanized, like he uses a bunch of American euphemisms and jokes, and has a very specific vibe that fits right at home with the over-the-top LA influencers of the time. I know they intended for all the bad guys to be outsiders, but Robbie Ray isn't an outsider, nor is he a villain, unless shitty jokes make you a villain, so I'm not sure if he was meant as some sort of satire or not. My best guess is that he was just supposed to appeal to a very immature, haha wacky Borderlands 2 style humor that was fairly popular at the time. I call it millennial writing, no offense. Anyway, I like his missions. He sends Ajay to propaganda centers to destroy propaganda paraphernalia. These again are basically outposts with additional objectives. For that reason, I like them a lot, and I wish there was more of these instead of hunting missions or collectibles. Next there are the Outpost Master missions. These allow you to replay particular outposts and attempt to get a high score. They also award a small amount of money for doing them. They're outposts, so they're fun. But I really like that they included this because it means you don't have to reset all of your outposts to do any particular one. Final of all the side missions are the Karma events. These are random events that pretty generously populate Kyrat. They are random scenarios that require immediate action on Ajay's part. They're also quite varied. One is just a typical Golden Path versus the Royal Army kind of fight. One is a singular hostage rescue. Another is a courier that must be killed, usually found on an ATV. One is where you assist stranded travelers with repairing their vehicle. This one's been around since Far Cry 3. One is killing a lieutenant and looting his corpse. Finally, and fairly rarely, there are bomb defusals. These are pretty damn rare though, and I think they only happen in specific places. I actually don't know if I've ever seen them before this playthrough, and I guess most people never saw it because even the Phantom Wiki fails to even mention it. All this work the developers put into making Far Cry 4 feel more chaotic really paid off. The open world, as far as I'm concerned, is a straight upgrade from Far Cry 3. Compared to the lackluster random events of Far Cry 3, these offer much more substance while simply existing in Kyrat. In Far Cry 3, the sandbox outside of Outposts was rather limited because the extent of your random encounters was basically just pirates doing patrols or just walking around. There of course were other things, but they were notably more rare and not that interesting. It's hard to get deep into the sandbox when the toys are given are rather shallow. By giving more varied content with much longer interaction times at a much higher frequency, Far Cry 4 heightens its sandbox experience pretty much in every way. Adding to the sandbox experience are more mechanics. They varied the stats that AJ have over Jason, like having more grenade rounds and arrows but decreasing syringe amount. But overall, these stats have stayed the same more or less. Difference is the new mechanics. You of course have the bait and the throwing knives, but there's also the ability to release brakes on cars. You have sticky grenades to C4, the wingsuit is simply in the shop to be bought fairly early on. There's this new guns for hire system where you call in a Golden Path soldier to help you. He can be upgraded as well. One of the best improvements was the vehicle combat. In Far Cry 3 you couldn't shoot in vehicles, but here you can turn all the way around and even shoot out the back window. For this reason, Ajay also has a slot specifically for sidearms, as to make sure he always has one in vehicles for combat. I honestly think they should have allowed the player to screw themselves by not having one if they want to, but there's no point in the game where having the sidearm is needed in any kind of like story segment, and even when Far Cry usually wants you to have a gun, they just give you a pistol whether you have one or not. It's not that big of a deal because they did have up the options in the game. Instead of just pistols, there's also a grenade launcher and a sawed-off shotgun. This really helps alleviate the issue by allowing the slot to be more varied, so it doesn't feel like a straight downgrade from Far Cry 3. This mechanic is also why Far Cry now has auto drive. You can let the game drive you where you want to go, or just stay on the road and drive endlessly around. This allows the player to focus on shooting instead of driving. This of course has a downside of making traveling even less engaging of a mechanic if you choose to use it. Speaking of driving, there's a lot more vehicles, but the only real notable addition is the gyrocopter. This thing honestly sucks to drive, it never feels right and is super slippery if that makes sense. The camera feels all sorts of wrong, like it's rotating around a different axis than it's supposed to be, but despite all that, I do like its inclusion because flying places is still pretty cool and quite convenient. Kyrat is easier to travel than ever. There's literally a flying vehicle, it doesn't get much easier than that. If you just want to skip past everything, flying is always an easy option. Besides that, the wingsuit sees way more use here because of the verticality. And the verticality can be overcome with the abundance of grappling points as well. They also added way more guns. There's also a ton of signature weapons. Not much to say there, other than that more options is better in a sandbox. Stealth even saw a minor improvement with the ability to drag bodies after killing enemies, which can eventually be upgraded so you can shoot enemies while doing it. There's just a bunch of these small features that enhance the gameplay, but don't radically change the game or the gameplay overall. All of these random side activities, especially the Karma events, make Kyrat not feel so empty. In Far Cry 3, the outposts provide a lot of the sandbox experience. In both games, enemy encounters happen around outposts before they're taken. But in Far Cry 3, once the outpost is taken, the random encounters are completely removed. In this game, you'll still see all of the same random encounters and hostile activities, but just at a very slightly decreased rate. The weight the outposts are asked to hold have been majorly decreased in the series as time goes on, and I think that's probably a good thing. The last gameplay addition I'd like to mention are the fortresses. There are 4 in the game, one representing each of Pagan's lieutenants and himself. These are predictably just harder outposts, much harder. Pagan's is single-handedly the hardest outpost in all of the series, don't at me. The sheer amount of reinforcements, snipers, heavy enemies, and helicopters is actually just insane. It's a good thing too, because it's a ton of fun. My only real complaint is the backwards-ass way they went about implementing these. It really is a head-scratcher. So the way it works is that once you kill the lieutenants, their fortresses became way easier to take out. This is really kind of strange to me. You'll find the doors busted in, there won't be any landmines around the walls, and there'll be way less enemies. So if you're like me, you'll just do them early on to make sure you get the toughest experience. Because that's kind of what the whole idea of the fortress was, wasn't it? To be an extra difficult challenge, standing on the horizon to challenge the player? Naturally, one would hope that it could be done last, as players love to leave the toughest challenge till the end, as sort of a way to feel like we're climbing the mountain of difficulty and overcoming that challenge. But if you kill the lieutenants, they become easier than a normal outpost. It's odd, it just makes me treat it as a regular outpost as I clear the area so I don't miss out on that challenge, instead of something that feels like a significant challenge. A very odd decision for sure. I think they added it because they felt like it made little sense for the lieutenant to be dead, but their fortress is still at max power, which is fair. I honestly don't think a single person would have cared though. If that was a problem, the solution was pretty obvious. So obvious they came up with it in about 30 seconds while writing the script. Just require the player to take out the fortress to get access to the final missions for each lieutenants. Boom, easy. The story would just take very minor rewrites to work, obviously, but it ain't nothing radical to overhaul, that's for sure. When the outposts are taken out, the outposts in their region will also stop being attacked. This is a random event where outposts that Ajay is near can be attacked again by the Royal Army and hypothetically taken over. This doesn't seem to work though. In the dozens of times I've seen this happen, I've only had it actually get reverted back to hostile like one time. Overall, Far Cry 4 has outdone all the games before it in sheer choice and variation in gameplay, by a mile too. Well, mostly because there's still those stupid-ass collectibles, which aren't fun and will never be fun. The game has well enough content to keep me busy with actually enjoyable stuff. I didn't need all these damn collectibles. As an additional note, they added a couple of quality of life things. Syringes work nearly identical to Far Cry 3, except that the healing has autocraft now, which just means that you can just stock up on green leaves, which now stack in the inventory and they'll just autocraft. So while yes, you can have a limit on how many you can carry, your limit is actually how many leaves you're carrying plus the ones in your pouch. It's funny because I wonder if the devs ever noticed or cared if they did. The UI got a nice overhaul that makes buying stuff and selling stuff in your inventory way easier. This is aided by the way they added a traveling merchant as well, so you don't have to travel back to outposts all the time to buy stuff. Finally, they added the ability to turn off looting, skinning, and plant collecting animations. They actually sped those up as well, but I just turned them off anyway.
Life was such a wheel that no man could stand upon it for long, and it always, at the end, came round to the same place again.
Earlier we met Longinus, a zealous pastor obsessed with guns. He's one of the more memorable characters of Far Cry 4. He's much like Buck to me, in that he seems to have a missing something in the finished product that makes him a tough nut to crack. But I think after many years of wondering, that I understand his character, and unsurprisingly he didn't fall very far from the goals of all the other characters in this game. His name is a reference to the legendary figure in Christian mythology. The mythological Longinus is said to have pierced Jesus' side with a lance. Both him and Far Cry 4's Longinus has converted to Christianity after morally dubious acts. His backstory is that he has sold blood diamonds as a warlord in an unnamed African country, only to be shot in the head and reborn, as he put it. This led to him leaving the country in an effort to get the diamonds back as a way to make up for the sins as a warlord. Naturally, it's speculated that he is Prosper Kawasi. I hope I'm saying that right, one of the warlords in Far Cry 2. If you side with the UFLL at that part of the game, you kill him at some waterfalls called Goka Falls. Interestingly enough, Longinus claims he was baptized at Goka Falls. So the players shot him in the head and he didn't die. He was then nursed back to health in Paula and then was baptized in some of those falls. It all lines up far too well for me to believe he's not Kawasi. I mean, hell, even during his cutscenes the game plays music from Far Cry 2. But what is his character saying? Well, he's just another part of the cycle of violence. He said he woke up a new man, but here he is, selling arms to the Golden Path, arming Ajay with a pistol for free and encouraging him to buy more guns, and ultimately fueling the war in Kyrat. He basically just became one of the jackals from Far Cry 2. He didn't change, he's just on one side of the wheel, taking in his share of the profit while he stands upon it. He just found a new way to make money in a way that feels guilt-free perhaps. Or he's just lying about being reborn and it's all still an act. I guess maybe he could also believe that he's arming the Golden Path for a morally good reason because they're an insurgent group against a dictator. Who knows, either way he's fueling a war machine rather than being a war machine. In this way he feels much more like Dennis from Far Cry 3. Dennis was said to be close to the generals of Liberia and found power once more in the Rook Islands. So that's Longinus, but what about his missions? Well, there's a couple of different kinds. The first asks you to follow a target to a bunker so that Ajay can get some diamonds back. There's also a couple more of these missions in his mission roster as well. All they are is a player tailing someone to a bunker without being caught, and entering that bunker, then taking the diamonds and dropping them off. I mean, they're fun enough, but the tailing stuff just feels a bit janky. The enemies seem to spot Ajay at inconsistent distances, and even when their heads are turned. It's odd, but not really a game-breaking bug or anything. Assuming it even is a bug, I'm not quite sure.
Besides these, you also get one mission where you get to go higher up in the Himalayas. It's quite neat. This section features much harder enemies since they are entirely armored. This means only headshots are able to kill them instantly, besides takedowns of course. The mission is a fairly similar level that kind of feels closer to Far Cry 2004 in structure, in which you find a few packages that contain diamonds. You use the same little tracker device as in Far Cry 2. It's a pretty tongue-in-cheek reference to the collectibles of that game. I've heard this mission get a lot of flack, but I've always quite enjoyed it. The change in visuals, the extra difficulty, the air tank mechanic, the criminally underused ice falling mechanic, the low visibility, it's always been pretty memorable to me and fairly enjoyable. Overall, Longinus adds very little to the overall game, given his low mission count and repetitive content, yet he's just as memorable to me as any of the other characters because of his excellent writing and unique feel that the other characters just don't give me. Far Cry has consistently managed to make characters that stick around in the minds of players with usually less than like 5 minutes on screen. It's pretty remarkable. It's quite the testament to the writer's talent, and I wish Far Cry had let each of these characters breathe a little little bit more. Longinus leaves Ajay with little in the way of a satisfying ending, probably because it was cut content by my understanding. He moves on from Kyrat to find more diamonds, of course, and that's the last we ever hear about him in the series besides a possible cameo in the Far Cry 6 DLC, but I haven't played it so I can't speak to that. Doing as he's told, Ajay sets out to kill Dupleur. This mission is one of the most memorable and interesting in any Far Cry game if you ask me. I constantly have heard people praise it. The mission itself is actually quite a simple setup, but it's extremely fun. There's multiple reasons for that. The first is that it kind of accomplishes what the Fortresses failed to do. It's the mission that sees Ajay complete a really tough challenge before confronting Paul, which was kind of what I wanted those Fortresses to do in the first place. We've heard occasional rumblings of his sadist little town throughout the game, called the City of Pain. The Golden Path fear him, and they know that he's powerful. So finally getting to confront him in his own home is quite an exciting prospect. The mission itself is also decently well planned, though it does have its quirks. It's a stealth-only mission that has a ton of enemies in it. The going will be slow, but it's also satisfying. The goal is to take 3 pictures of captives and then capture Paul himself. The quirks, though, is how the game reloads on death. It doesn't save your kills, but it does save your location, like in its checkpoint system, and the completed objectives. So you kill like 10 guys, right? And then they'll all respawn, but upon death and reload, if you've taken any pictures, your location and progress is saved with that, but not the enemies. It's very strange. It means you can also kind of half-ass it by sneaking really haphazardly, getting a lot of suspicion, and then just die or get caught to reset that alarm state. As long as you get the picture before you go into full detection, it's fine. This is kind of awkward. I just don't think Far Cry was built around a mission structure like this, and these issues are likely a limit of the game engine itself. But it means that you can kind of cheese a mission, which is like whatever, but it also means you kind of get robbed of your stealth kills if you do die and respawn, because it just undoes all that, but it doesn't redo your progress. It's very strange. So it basically means you just sit back and go, wait, so all these enemies just get reset, but I get to keep my pictures. It's incredibly unsatisfying to lose that progress with stealth kills. Overall though, given this mission isn't insanely difficult, I imagine a lot of people didn't catch on to the jank. I personally didn't notice it until like my 6th playthrough, when I actually died enough to notice. Getting inside Paul's little torture office, we get to see one of my favorite cutscenes where Paul is on a call with his daughter before the interrogation.
I will be right with you. Hi, Ashley. You did? That is amazing. Good girl. Are you getting ready for bed? Did you brush your teeth? For at least 10 seconds? That's my girl. Can you give your mom a big kiss for me? Well, you know she gets lonely when I'm not there. You are the lady of the house. Of course. Now, you know Daddy has to work, so... A gift? Sure, sweetheart. What did you want? A ring. No, I don't think I've seen anything like that for you, sweetheart. I'm sorry. What else would you like? A necklace? Oh, a gold necklace. Well, actually, I think I see the exact thing. Yes, of course, it is shiny. Now listen, Daddy has to work, all right? So I have to go. I love you too. Yes. Kisses, kisses. Don't let the bedbugs bite. Okay. Bye, Ladybug. I apologize for that. My daughter. You were here on time. I was not ready. No disrespect.
As we learned in the intro, he's a man fed up with his desk jockey life and he wanted out. Pretty understandable. I couldn't help but wonder if Paul is supposed to be something of a riff on like Fight Club and like American Psycho combined. Just like the other villains in the game, Paul is an outsider. He's a clear and total psycho, and it's implied that he gets off on the torture in some of the notes you can find in the game. He's also a really straightforward character, honestly. Like, I don't think Paul was written to have much of a deeper meaning in this text as a character, but rather just plays the same role as all the other villains, as to be a reflection as Ajay. Hell, he even treats Ajay the way that Min does. He is rather jovial with Ajay and seems to not really like understand why Ajay would be attacking him. We see this in his speech as Ajay drives him off to the location where he's supposed to be tortured for information.
Ajay, come on! Don't be like that! Don't pretend you give a damn when you don't! Huh? Find your inner truth, Ajay! And the truth is you're good at killing! I am good at enhanced interrogation, and you're great at good old-fashioned slaughter! Come on, take a look around you. This place was built for guys like us. Do you really care what happens to anyone here? Huh? Or you just jonesing to get back out there and leave a trail of bodies in your wake? Rhetorical question. You don't care about Newer's kid or her husband. Huh? I mean, quick, what were their names? You even know? That's what I thought.
This is one of the more blatant ways the game gets its meta message across. Kyrat was literally built for guys like us, you and me and Paula, of course. It's like a fake place that only exists for a player to exert their power over it and their will, and the way that Paul exerts his will, because it's literally a game world. I think there's also some obvious juxtaposition with Paul and Noor. They're both family focused, yet Paul actively takes Noor's family away while he's extremely attached to his own family. It's a cruel little insight into the depravity that is Paul's mind. Paul suggests Ajay take him to the airport. It's commonly assumed that this used to be a possible ending to this mission, but was cut like all the other stuff in the game. They made a lot of cuts in this game, like most games, but I think especially with this one. What you can do with him is just kill him while he's in the car, though. This doesn't affect anything. Meet and Sabal will just kill him and say it's a shame that they couldn't interrogate him. It also means you can't find him in Banapur at the end of the game in a cage, and that's a funny little Easter egg. But yeah, it's like most of the characters in the game, there just isn't a whole lot to dig into. If they were trying to say something with this character other than, well, the obvious, I assume it was something about desk jobs and masculinity. I'm not sure. And yeah, his nickname is a pun. Deplore sounds really close to deplorable. Overall, pretty memorable as always with most of the characters in these games, and had one of the more interesting, if not a bit janky missions in Far Cry. After this mission, I did the Brick Factory mission. It's a good mission enough, nothing worth noting other than it's another just kind of choice mission. Amita wants to keep the building to provide a place for opium refinement, and Sabal wants to tear it down. You already know the reasons why. It was fun, nothing more to really say about that. Then I went to kill Noor, which puts an end to the Noor and Paul saga. Then we get to see the cutscene that flipped my mind from supporting Sabal to Amita when I was first playing the game. Here Ajay is also kind of sympathetic to Noor, as you'll note.
You're a drug peddler! That's what you are! Who do you remind me of? Oh yes, Pagan.
I'm like Pagan because I have a vision for Kyrat. I'm trying to take us out of your third world bullshit.
It's our history, our culture, our traditions.
Tradition? Like what? Marrying little girls, is that it? Is that your big plan for Bhadra? Oh, go for it. Go ahead, show Ajay what kind of man you are.
I don't answer to you. It's Noor's turn.
At least we agree on that.
She didn't have a choice. Pagan forced Noor to do those things. He had her family.
And how many families did she kill to save her own?
Doesn't matter why she did it. She has to pay. Just like everyone else.
I'll decide what happens to Noor.
As such, Ajay of course gets to make a choice. You can shoot her mercifully without her ever knowing the truth, or you can just tell her the truth. I told her the truth.
I don't need your pity. I want my family back.
I'm sorry, but you're free now.
Free from what? All the people I've killed? From everything I've done? I gave them this taste for blood. Your blood. Mine.
Isn't that what you want? More blood! Here! Take more! Take all of it, you fucking animals!
I like the little touch that she's mauled by the animals at the end. It's interesting that she calls all of these people in the arena animals, yet she seems to separate herself from it to some extent, again showing that in her mind she was justified in her actions, at least to some extent. She clearly felt some guilt, but not enough to keep going through with her absolutely vile actions. So yeah, that's just Noor and Paul wrapped up. Halfway there, we've got 2 more to go. Ajay becomes an asset for the CIA in the next hour or so of gameplay. It's our old friend Willis, a guy who has returned to play the role of intervening in foreign states on behalf of good old Uncle Sam. These missions are pretty straightforward, literally. You'll start by saving Willis as a deal goes wrong, and it's left pretty ambiguous, but Willis does seem to be in contact with Yuma to do some sort of a trade. When that's all said and done, he and Ajay meet. The conversation isn't very important, but ends with Ajay going all Mission Impossible on this plane. An odd little thing about the plane is that it's also set to fly right after there's like a huge battle at the airport. Like, did this guy just sit through all that stuff? Why does he just wait there until he's like ready to fly? I really don't know. Like, why not just take off immediately once the gunshots start? It's really weird. I think the designers wanted you to play this mission sometime after Willis's first, like, saving mission, so it feels like some time passed and that you're just kind of meeting him later, but if you do it literally immediately after, it's very off-putting. Anyway, after Willis actually gives Ajay his mission, which is to help the CIA and he'll get paid in information, the information in question is about Ajay's parents. Of course, we already know most of that stuff because we finished the game earlier, but there is a bit of information that is important. Ishwari, Ajay's mother, is one of the Tarun Matara, which is what Sabal is trying to do to Bajra. So these missions are more high altitude stuff. They're not too great. All three very much feel like Far Cry 3. They're all about as linear as Far Cry has ever gotten, even compared to the first game. Visually, they're interesting and have a cool premise, which is taking out Yuma's lieutenants, but overall suffer from their linear design and difficulty spike. If you do these missions earlier in the game than I did in my current playthrough, but I did do in my first playthrough, you'll likely find that your guns are not well equipped for this fight. The enemies are heavily armored and very accurate. The level design makes it easy to become cornered as well. Definitely a low point for the game, but they are quick missions, so if you know what you're doing, it's not so bad.
Consider this information your last paycheck. You've been killing CIA assets this entire time. We're cleaning house. Pagan no longer represents a clear and present danger to the U.S. We needed to erase our footprint in Kyrat. You did a damn fine job of it!
So everything you told me is a lie.
What I said about your mom and your old man, all that was true. What I told you about Yuma, you can ask her yourself!
What the fuck are you doing, man?
Sorry, kid, but like I told you, every patriot I know is a son of a bitch!
Willis, of course, being a son of a bitch, betrays Ajay, and it turns out that those lieutenants were actually CIA informants as well. He also lets Yuma capture Ajay, which leads us to an actual like face-to-face interaction with Pagan Min after quite a dry spell of such things.
Hello. Did we enjoy our time with the CIA? Welcome to Dagesh. I apologize for the Spartan accommodations, but you have been a naughty little shit, haven't you? Gallivanting about with a golden path. And poor Paul. Are you still sore about what he did with your little monkey friend? What was his name? Deadpan, dipshit, doorknob? I'm sorry for your ennui. But let me ease him into this, Yuma. You're about to mindfuck the poor boy. Perhaps a little sugar on your shit sandwich?
Whatever, you've seen him. He's still breathing. Now go away, I've got work to do.
Fine. But I want him alive, with all the bits that count intact. But one last thing. Now, Ajay, I know this is hard, but consider this tough love, prison love. After all, you have a suite with a spectacular view. Oh, and one final piece of advice. I wouldn't sleep too close to the edge. Whatever you say, dear.
Things are really weird in this cutscene. Again, Pagan doesn't seem exactly too bothered about Ajay's resistance against him and his government, though he does seem to want to punish him in some way or another, kind of like as a tough love, as he said. Yuma and Pagan were working with Willis to kill the informants and then capture Ajay so they could presumably get him to side with Pagan Min. But then there's this like whole drug thing. Yuma has him administered some sort of hallucinatory drug, perhaps as a way to pry him loose from his previous issues with Pagan? I'm not so sure. Anyway, this section basically goes full on horror, I suppose. Ajay must make it through this prison without getting caught by these sleep paralysis demons. It's an interesting idea, but it is kind of obnoxious because these demons run faster than Ajay, so it's a lot of trial and error before you get to know the path in and out without getting seen. Luckily, the path is easy to remember once you've done it, so at least subsequent playthroughs aren't nearly as obnoxious. Ajay escapes by making a grappling hook and descending into the valley below. How he didn't get caught while doing this is very much unknown to me. There's literally no guards in the prison. It's really quite odd. I don't think this is up to like some big 4D chess strategy between Pagan and Yuma to like allow him to escape. I think it's just the game developers didn't think a whole lot about that. Anyway, the next section is a titular take on the player's weapons getting taken away section that we've seen in Far Cry 2 and 3. I quite remember really enjoying it my first time playing. It's quite tough and generally feels fair, but once you know the way through, it's easy peasy on repeat playthroughs. That's where this game suffers with these kind of sections. Repeating them just isn't that interesting because you know exactly what to do and it kind of trivializes the experience. Anyway, once he's out, he walks into the snow. Amita tells him he's been missing for a week, implying that he was in prison for quite a while. I doubt the implication is that he survived in the snow for that long with no food or water for a week. He'd be dead in hours if he passed out in the snow like that.
Finally, after like an hour and a half into this stupid video, we get to opening up the coveted North. Oh, and by the way, thanks for watching for an hour and a half. Once again, Far Cry has done the second area in the second act kind of thing, though this isn't actually labeled as the second act, but you understand what I mean. You're smart. The mission is quite fun though. Getting to drive up to these gates and make a bombastic entrance, pun intended, is never not fun. It's also a fairly tough mission because of the sheer amount of enemies thrown at you. But after so many hours in the game, about 210 at the moment that I actually recorded this, it's actually not that tough. Upon getting to the north, we actually get another face-to-face interaction with Pagan and his man as he kind of comes to harass locals, only for it to turn out to be a body double once AJ kills him, which I kind of saw coming during my first playthrough. Like, obviously, there's no way they'd let AJ kill Pagan right after entering the last 25% of the game before killing Yuma, but I think what they did here might have been something of a response to the backlash about Voss dying about 60% of the way through the game in Far Cry 3. Quite a lot of people were angry about that and said it ruined the game, and seeing that the devs seemingly intentionally responded to a lot of the criticism of that game, I don't think it's that far-fetched to assume this was a response to that. Speaking of Yuma, the next mission is dealing with her. In order to find her, Pagan actually throws the Golden Path a bone. He name drops where Yuma actually is, oddly enough, implying that there's some sort of an issue between them. During this broadcast, he plays it off as he trusts Yuma to keep him safe, but clearly there's something between the lines there. Also during this broadcast, he mentioned the attempt on his life, which also implies that he purposely put his body double in danger of death in order to make the process seem a little bit more legit. The body double also serves as a bit of a metaphor, I think, for how Pagan is a recluse who refuses to let himself be seen by his country or his people or really anybody at all. Getting around to Yuma brings probably the hardest character for me to break down. Yuma reeks of cut content, so it makes it hard to decipher exactly what she's all about. You see, she idolized Pagan as like an older brother figure because he basically helped raise her in Hong Kong. When they did their little switcheroo with the Air and Kirat, she became his second in command. But sometime later, Pagan of course fell in love with Ishwari and eventually had a baby with her. Yuma found that it made Pagan kind of weak and reclusive in her eyes, and she eventually had something of an identity crisis. She then began getting really into the mythology and lore about Kalanag and Shangri-La. I wouldn't be surprised if she was also a bit into drugs. She began idolizing Kalanag, almost seeing herself as him. So this leads to Ajay's confrontation with Yuma, in which she drugs him and seems to influence Ajay's hallucinations with her diatribe about herself. Yuma is on to Pagan's plan as well.
Pathetic! Pagan sends a boy like you to kill me? After everything I did for him! Before your horrible mother came along, he was fearless! Nobody could stand up to him! Then your mother... Your mother...
Alright, another correction. I mentioned that Far Cry 3 was the only one that kind of really did prescience. Well, I did get that wrong again, because in this dream, Ajay sees the future of Sabal and Amita, depending on who's currently leading Golden Path. I have a good reason for why I missed this, but I'll mention it later at the end of the game.
I want you to go into every home and find every child, bring them back here, to me.
Then we get to the worst boss fight in Far Cry up to this point by a long shot, though the devs really did outdo themselves later in the series, trust me, but we'll get to that obviously. Anyway, this really fucking sucks. It's gimmicky, buggy, and way too long, all around poorly designed. Look, we need to stop doing boss fights in FPS games, okay? Unless your game has advanced movement, extremely unique mechanics, or is just like another looter shooter, let's just not do it. Can we all agree to not do that, please? This fight is against Yuma, who looks like Kalanag, and her soldiers who look like demons. She's also the antagonist who has the least amount of screen time, and it's hard to fully understand the ideas behind her. Her whole obsession with the past and history and everything, and seeing herself as a hero in the past, feels like it's trying to say something more than just being a reflection of Ajay, but I'm not so sure. As far as being a reflection, she's quite good at it. Isn't the idea of a paradise on Earth kind of true to Ajay? Isn't that what Kyrat is? Isn't it his own little kind of violent playground, an escapist fantasy? Wasn't his paradise to be a place where he can exert his power with impunity? Isn't that what games are? Well, moving on, the next two missions are more Far Cry 4 action. Defending a temple or looting it for its gold is the next decision Ajay must make for the Golden Path. I'm sure you know whose ideas these were. It's a fun mission that's as bombastic as the endgame should feel like. The next mission is a mission that sees Ajay and the Golden Path taking out artillery that is aimed at a town. It's also quite fun. Yeah, I always manage to forget it's even in the game. Then comes the penultimate mission, killing Sabal or Amita, depending on who you followed. Whoever is in charge of the Golden Path will task Ajay with killing whoever isn't. Amita tasked me with killing Sabal, of course.
Did she send you, brother? Did you volunteer? What do you think you're doing? You shit on everything your father built. Congratulations. Everything that meant something is irrelevant thanks to you. That's what's truly sad, brother. You handed over everything to Amita. To Amita. You think she can fix Kyrat? How? Drug fields as far as the eye can see. Suicide nets in factory towns where men, women, and children are free to be poor? It's a land of equal opportunity where everyone's a slave. Do you think this is the country your mother wanted her ashes to be scattered in? So what's it going to be, brother?
But I mean, I couldn't kill him. He's just like me. Him, Amita, Pagan, Paul, Nor, Yuma, Longinus, we're all the same type of person playing the same type of game here. How the hell could I just pull a really hypocritical move of killing Sabal? That would be like killing myself. So I let him go. He disappears, never to return. Finally, we have arrived. Time to kill Pagan. Well, not really, for the same reason I didn't kill Sabal. This mission feels like a proper end to such a long climb of a pile of bodies to confront Pagan. It's super chaotic, has some really good music, feels like an actual siege, which is what all of the fortresses should have felt like, in my opinion, but yeah, whatever. It also has more of the weird control point mechanics, as if this was like COD or TF2. And of course we must destroy the giant Pagan statue.
What do you have against my likeness? All those posters, Eric, my double, and now this. Am I missing a hint? Should I start taking this personally? That statue was solid fucking gold. Literally. I'm not being metaphorical. Do you know how many artifacts I had to melt down to get it made? And poor Eric standing there for God knows how long just to pose for it. Well, it's done, it's done.
Pagan also finally asks the real question. Should he be taking this all personally? This whole time he's been letting Ajay just kind of gallivant about, wrecking his country, killing hundreds. He let us have our little playground experience, expressing our will. Finally he seems to understand that this wasn't just someone else doing what he does. Well, we are, but we think we're not doing it ourselves, but we definitely are. All the way back at the beginning, he thought this was all about the Crab Rangoon. He wasn't joking, he literally thought that we, Ajay the player, went on a tirade because of the Crab Rangoon, because he couldn't understand that anyone like himself wouldn't do such a flippant thing over such a petty reason.
Come in. I apologize for the austerity I sent to help home. Chances are you shot them on your way in. Now, before we begin, to whom am I speaking? The son who returned to scatter his mother's ashes, or the lunatic who has murdered his way to the top of my mountain? If I was speaking to the first guy, then I would say, sit down. Let's be civilized. Enjoy some food. But we tried that before, didn't we? At our first meeting? You sat right here. Paul was off applying voltage to the nipples of your rude little +1. I stood just like this. And what were my exact words?
I'm very particular with my words.
Stay here, enjoy the crab rangoon, don't move. I'll be right back. Now, if you had just listened, just waited for me, then we would have come back here straight away, together, and scattered your mother's ashes. So then you must be the second guy. Who didn't listen, decided instead to join the other monkeys and start throwing his shit around.
You know, if you give food to monkeys, they just throw their shit at each other.
This painting in the background is very similar to the pagan we often see in marketing, like in this trailer I used at the beginning of the video. But if you look at those and look at the pagan in-game, you'll notice he looks a lot older and a little bit more saggy. I couldn't help but notice that because Pagan said he uses body doubles for everything, including the paintings, was Ubisoft big brain enough to make a body double be the pagan in the marketing? Nah, probably not. It was probably just a redo of his character later in the game, but they didn't go redo all the art. But I can pretend they were.
Once you spread those ashes, all the ties you have to that previous life are gone. And then what happens? Well, I suppose you could do what I did after Mohan killed Lakshmana. Oh, you didn't know that, did you? Huh. Yes, your father killed your half-sister, and then your mother killed him in return. I simply continued where she left off. I killed so many people for them. But then I realized I was only using Lakshmana's death as an excuse to do whatever I wanted to do. Just as you use those ashes as an excuse to do whatever you want to do.
Finally, I just watched as he flew away, because I'm no better than him. You can kill him here. I did so in my first playthrough, but not this time. So that prologue, huh? It told us all we needed to know about this game, and it wasn't very sly about it either. The most obvious is the way that Pagan holds the phone to show himself and Ajay together. The song they chose also isn't exactly subtle.
Should I stay or should I go now? Should I stay or should I go now? If I go there will be trouble, and if I stay it will be double.
And then we do definitely go tear some shit up.
You and I are gonna tear shit up!
There's just one thing that the prologue doesn't quite show us, and that's the little sort of cutscenes that you can find by going to either Tirtha or the Jalandu Temple, depending on who you let lead the Golden Path by the end of the game. For me, it was Amita. So this is what the prescience thing was all about. I didn't think this game had it because I never knew that it existed until I watched White Light's Far Cry 4 video. And holy shit, he is correct. The 180 these characters do here is just insane. Like, the whiplash is crazy. Get a load of this shit.
I want you to go into every home and find every child. Bring them back here to me. Go.
What's going on?
We need more soldiers to fight the holdouts from the Royal Army. And I need to start thinking about Kirat's future. We have opium fields to protect, laws to enforce, workers to keep in line.
So you're forcing the people to join Golden Path?
I'm sacrificing our liberties for peace later. You can either get in line or get out of the way.
Please, मेरे बच्चों को छोड़ दो. हमारे पास और कुछ नहीं है, सिर्फ हमारे बच्चे हैं. Please.
Uto. This is a good thing. Your children will help Kirat become a better place. If you love Kirat, you will turn around, go into your homes, Or I will have you shot.
Why are you doing this?
I'm doing what's best for my country.
And what about Badra? What does she have to say about this?
It doesn't matter what she has to say. Send her away. I don't need a Tarun Matara here for our enemies to rally behind.
Send her away. Really? Where?
It's not your concern. And don't bother trying to find her. Badra's not coming back.
Dumb puffer jacket bitch say, what? She iced Badra.
So Amita decides she needs child laborers and soldiers. Okay, I can sort of get behind that, but she also fucking executed Badra? Why? I know what this ending is doing, but holy fucking a handbasket, this was overboard to the point of parody. There's just no way Amita would spend all game defending Badra just to take her out back and tell her to look at the poppy fields, like for fuck's sake. Sabal likewise, one hell of a turn, but maybe not a full 180 at least. He actually does have a little bit of character build-up beforehand that makes him kind of feel like he would do this sort of thing, and it kind of makes some sense, but it's still hard to see him killing his own people, even if they sided with Amita. So Far Cry 4 is all about holding a mirror to us through a bunch of different characters. It's about how someone like Pagan can fuck a whole country for long after his reign, even when he's supplanted. It's about power vacuums and the people willing, eager to fill them. It's about how there's more nuance to conflicts, especially a conflict like this. It's about power vacuums and the people willing, eager to fill them. It's about how there's more nuance to conflicts, especially a conflict like this, than we want to assume. It's about how easy it is to justify actions of wanton violence. Far Cry 4 constantly strokes the player's ego, telling them that what we're doing is good and that's all going to according to plan and everybody likes us for it, especially the Golden Path. Far Cry 3 created more variety in the characters as far as what those characters were meant to represent in the narrative and what they were meant to critique. Far Cry 4 lets all of its characters pretty much play the same role in terms of narrative purpose, but they do have unique personalities and motivations. Far Cry 3 immersed itself in the 2008 to 2012 kind of culture online for a very specific purpose, while this game mostly just did it for comedic relief and relevance. Far Cry 3 tackled a multitude of things that the writers wished to talk about, while Far Cry 4 is a much less layered game and sticks pretty closely to just being a meta-commentary on video games as a whole. This will probably piss someone off, but sometimes I play games or watch movies that feel like they're kind of like literature for their mediums, such as Wes Anderson movies for films. They feel very literary to me. I feel like Far Cry 3 was like that, or at least attempting to be that. Same thing with something like The Stanley Parable or, of course, Bioshock. But it doesn't mean that Far Cry 4 is worse, it's just a whole different vibe. Compared to Far Cry 3, you can see why it's called Far Cry 3.5 pretty often. The similarities are pretty damn obvious. Formula is nearly identical, down to even like every gameplay scenario. But the devil is in the details. All the variation in gameplay, the commitment to freedom, the focus on patching holes that Far Cry 3 had, it all culminates to a game that does have more unique personality than I once thought. And I think most of us thought. Far Cry 4 used some of Blood Dragon's innovations to bolster its content, but also took that and really ran with it. This game also did address the urgency issue that Far Cry 3 had as well, because the task of taking over a country and such kind of feels directly related to the end goal of toppling the government by taking out outposts and helping all the people. Far Cry 4 also attempted to handle the white savior critique as well by making Ajay into a karate citizen, but as I explained earlier, I don't think that really absolves the game of that trope. But what does though is the way that it positions Ajay and the Golden Path as villains. They're not saviors. They perhaps unfucked Kyrat by like 5% of its total fuckedness, but they'll still fill that with whatever kind of other fuckedness they want to. This game simply cannot be the white savior narrative because it makes all the people doing all the saving, even the natives, into bad guys. It's surprisingly nuanced in what feels like it was a completely unintentional way. I earnestly think that the writers thought that making Ajay return home would make this not a white savior, but they didn't consider what his villainhood would accomplish, and that it would actually accomplish that instead. Compared to Voss, Pagan Min seems utterly disinterested in creating a facade. He's a total psycho and doesn't do any of the hard boy shit that Voss does. He's super genuine in his mannerisms. He doesn't hide that Kyrat is his playground, because just like the player who doesn't hide that Kyrat is their playground, why would he? The 3.5 critique is really interesting to me as well, because Far Cry 4 is a sequel to the game that did massive numbers. People wanted more Far Cry. The developers delivered. Perhaps the 2-year development was a bit short though, I'd definitely argue. It led to a pretty crowded game with lots of cut content. They honestly could have probably done half the amount of named characters in this game and ended up more developed characters. But despite that, they're all pretty memorable. But yeah, it's a sequel. I don't understand what people expected. Ubisoft wanted more money from a brand new cash cow, which that's what companies exist to do, whether we like it or not, and the players wanted more Far Cry. Despite such a short development time, they improved almost all aspects of Far Cry 3. It's kind of extraordinary. It's quite the step up if we're being honest. Even like the small details. In my Far Cry 2 video, I talked about how the realistic fire propagation is cool and all, except I doubt it even mattered much at all at the end of the day, because people tend not to notice those little details like this. In my inexorable search for ever more Far Cry reviews, specifically in Far Cry 4 this case, I never once saw anybody mention the step up that Far Cry did take in the details department. Let's take one cool but completely overlooked aspect. The side content actually has details and little narratives in them, instead of just being random pirates like the previous game. What I mean is that when you approach, say, a hostage mission, you'll often hear a voice line from the Royal Army, or multiple voice lines that give some sort of context, such as a hostage mission where they exclaim how excited they are to take turns on the women. That would seem like a voice line they could use anywhere in all the hostage missions, but it only happens in this one spot, and I know because I've played this game so many damn times. Because that one spot is specifically for sex trafficking slaves in Kyrat. Then at that location, a customer will actually drive up to that building for, you know, his turn. It lends itself to some authenticity in the world, where places you go exist for more context, like country, and not just being a game world the way that Far Cry 3 kind of did, because Far Cry 3 did have named locations, but when you're there, it didn't really feel any different other than aesthetics. These scripted sequences in these missions just did not happen outside the main missions of Far Cry 3. So when I say Far Cry 4 did a lot of work in the details, I honestly expected a lot of people just dismiss it because they straight up didn't notice. Especially since the majority of players probably hadn't played Far Cry 3 for a year, or maybe several years before playing Far Cry 4. I think this issue with players not noticing incremental improvements lends itself to the Far Cry 3.5 criticism. Oh, and because I totally forgot to mention the skill tree anywhere in this essay, so I'm just gonna throw my thoughts here. It's not nearly as bad as Far Cry 3, but it is definitely worse than Blood Dragons, because Blood Dragon didn't have one. I've grown a healthy disdain for skill trees and just kind of dislike them on principle. The way they implement it is better, but not by much. And they also should have had a snowy region in the main game, not just on special missions. Overall, Far Cry 4 is a simpler game in the narrative realm, but for that reason it's more focused. It manages to subvert the white savior trope by accident in response to Far Cry 3. In pretty much every way, Far Cry 4 improved gameplay and player freedom. Ultimately, I like this game better than Far Cry 3 for those reasons. It's just a more full experience, despite its shortcomings. My last and biggest criticism is that the option to join Pagan should have been allowed throughout the entire game. Ajay has a direct connection to Min. He actually talks to him over the phone a couple times. Why not allow the player to say, hey, yeah, I guess I'll just join Min because he's just like me, or I just like him better, or whatever reason I have. There's a common interpretation that Far Cry 4 was trying to say Pagan was actually the good guy, and that this game was all about Ajay returning to his father to run the country. It's a bit disturbing how many people just unironically side with a psycho dictator because he was a bit charming, but I guess that shouldn't surprise me over the amount of Voss thirst posting that is just definitely out there, and I refuse to acknowledge. But yeah, no, sorry, the Golden Path may suck, like a lot, but they're not as bad as Pagan or Ajay for that matter when it comes to actually running the country, because at least they kind of care about the country. What this game was really about is the way that large-scale social movements like a civil war are never neat, they're never clear-cut and easy to understand, or even parse in the first place. The developers saw firsthand how a conflict like this still affects the people to this day, over a decade later. Far Cry 4 was about how people seek power and seek to use that power. The real world is not that easy. There's really clear-cut good and bad guys. Pagan definitely was not the good guy, but everyone else is pretty close behind him. Just something to think about. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, thanks again for watching. I'm sorry this video took me, I think it's been 38 days as of recording this since the Blood Dragon video came out. I took a few days off just from making videos to play, like, I don't know, I was playing some game at that moment, and then I got sick, and it turned out it was COVID, and that lasted a good long while. I couldn't really do much. I'm pretty sure that's the sickest I've ever been was the first day I had COVID, but the rest of it more or less just felt like typical flu symptoms. But yeah, I didn't do a whole lot at the time. But I actually did manage to avoid COVID for almost 3 years. Man, time doesn't exist for me. I don't know, like I have a very hard time remembering how long ago things were. It's pretty crazy. Like, it doesn't feel like it's been a month since my Blood Dragon video, but here we are. Anyway, thanks for watching all to this point. If you made it this far, you might as well subscribe, because apparently I did something right. And go ahead and leave a like and comment. And as far as what you should comment, let me know if you got COVID. How did that go? You know, it was the sickest I ever got that first day, but other than that, it was fine. And I'm pretty sure I have a little bit of long COVID because sometimes I get kind of sniffly out of nowhere. It's very strange, and I have a bit of a cough even weeks later. But it's not that bad. I have my taste back. I can taste things now, which I was really scared I was gonna lose. So if you had COVID, tell me how it is. If you haven't had COVID, tell me when's like what was the sickest you've ever been then? If that's ever been a thing that's happened to you, I guess. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you stick around because I think I'm gonna take a break from Far Cry for a couple of videos. I'll be doing the Primal video, but I want to do a couple short videos. At least just one. I want to talk about the Icon of Sin from Doom Eternal, because I don't want to talk about the entirety of Doom Eternal. Like, it's a fucking great game, don't get me wrong, but I want to specifically talk about the Icon of Sin and why I don't think it really works as a boss fight. And that'd be like a short, like 5, maybe 10-minute video. I kind of want to talk about the mountaintop of the giants and maybe the consecrated snowfields, but probably just mountaintop giants from Elden Ring. But I might actually do a whole video on Elden Ring, so that might be included in that. But I kind of want to do some shorter videos where I hyper focus on just one thing. So if you're interested in that, definitely let me know, because I really do like doing and watching all-encompassing videos about games, but not every game I really want to talk about it in that manner. So definitely let me know, and thanks for watching.